Yeah. All right. Good evening, everyone, and thank you all for joining us. My name is Alyssa Karpenka, and I'm the event coordinator for McNally Robinson Booksellers in Saskatoon. This event is coming to you from Treaty 6 territory, the traditional lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and Métis nations. Just to note that this event is being live streamed, so please be aware of the webcam to your right. I'd also like to take this moment to encourage you to silence your phones for the duration of the event. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the Saskatoon launch of Stay Up, Racism, Resistance, and Reclaiming Black Freedom by Khodi Dill and published by Annick Press. Thank you to Khodi for being here tonight and for working with us to create this event. Khodi Dill is an award-winning Bahamian Canadian spoken word artist, author, and anti-racist educator from Saskatoon. Centering equity at the heart of his practice, Khodi hopes that his work will engage people of all ages in social justice and the arts. Dill is the author of 2 picture books, including Welcome to the Cipher, which introduces young people to the transformative power of rap music, and Little Black Lives Matter, a book of affirmation and Black history for children. I'll now turn things over to Khodi. Please give him a warm welcome.
Thank you, Alyssa, and a huge thank you to McNally Robinson, as always. My favorite place to hang out and be with books and bring my family and everything like that. Always love this place. It's so warm and inviting, and you've certainly been very good to me since I've started this journey as an author. So I appreciate that. And thank you all for coming and being here today. There's such a cool mix of people from like different areas of my life and stuff like that. And I'm just really, warmed again by the support. Yeah, past, present, no future people here. I guess that's impossible, but that's lovely. So Stay Up, what is the story behind Stay Up? I guess, in my work that I do as a teacher, I'm often involved in anti-racism work as well. I studied anti-racism in university and everything like that. So it's been a passion of mine for some time. It's sometimes hard to imbue into a school setting and a classroom setting because there is this resistance to it occasionally. And certainly our school systems and our whole Ministry of Education, really, in case you couldn't tell, isn't really all that on board with anti-oppressive education. So it's a fight. But we were engaged in a book club a few years ago, must have been 2019, 2020 at my school. We were reading How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi, another incredible book that really served as a mentor text for me, in writing this book. There were a lot of books that I consulted through research for it, but that was one of the most impactful ones. And around that time, I was also writing Welcome to the Cipher. And I went and I told my principal, Tammy Girolami, about Welcome to the Cipher and how excited I was that I was going to have a book published and all that. And she thought it was really cool. And she's always been really, really supportive of me in my writing, which is great. But she said, I always pictured you for writing something like Ibram X. Kendi. And again, that's when I got the idea, really? You think I could? Or what have you? And so I just in passing, the next time I talked to my amazing editor, Claire at Annick Press, I said, you guys interested in doing any anti-racism books? It was just a thought, right? Anyways, within a couple of weeks, I was signed. And I was like, whoa, I didn't expect it to happen that fast. I was thinking a few years down the road or whatever, but things started moving very, very quickly because, there was, I think, a hunger for this sort of writing, thankfully. The timing was right. And Annick Press has been an incredible publisher when it comes to social justice and really centering that work and centering diverse voices. So really lucky to be involved with that. So big thanks to Tammy Girolami for planting the seed of me writing this book, which I think was always there, but I just didn't know it was going to happen so quickly. I'll say some thank yous at the beginning too, so that we can just do a little bit of a reading here, and I'll answer some questions, and then we can jump into signing and keep it simple tonight. I want to thank my editors, of course, at Annick Press, Claire and Kari, who've been incredible. Huge thanks to Carly Brown for all of your support and your partnership over the years. My parents who are here tonight for raising me up with this good conscience and conscious that I have. And my kids, Hazel and Ezra, who are really the reason I do everything that I do. Alice Kuipers has been a real big supporter of mine, another Saskatchewan author. And I remember I was in the middle of writing Stay Up, and I was working out of the Broadway Collective, which is this really cool co-writing space or co-working space in Saskatoon. And she saw me in crisis and just pulled me over, kind of said, "What's up? You know, can I help?" And gave me one of the best pep talks I've ever had as a writer, which just sort of scooped me up out of this feeling of being really, really overwhelmed, I think. You know, I started with nothing, right? When I pitched the book, I started with nothing basically, and ended up with about 75,000 words and 7 revisions and all of that. So, you know, this has been like a years-long process really of a lot of hard work. And so that was really helpful. Karina Vernon was an expert reader on this book. And so without her help too, I wouldn't have, it wouldn't be the product and the book that it is today. So thank you to Karina for your expertise and your review. And of course, the incredible artist, Stylo Starr. The artwork that is on the cover of this book and throughout is like hand-cut collage artwork. So really sort of a lost art in many ways. And Stylo was gracious enough to include some of my actual family photos that my dad provided for the book. Big ups to my dad for providing those. And yeah, just layer them with a variety of images that were sourced from elsewhere too, to create these finished pieces that really reflect, you know, what I want the book to be about. And you see with the mix of like crystals and flowers and, you know, everything that's represented here, this is a book that really, it doesn't just challenge issues of race and racism, but also like rigid notions of masculinity and other sort of things that are viewed as traditional and right, but aren't necessarily, you know, the only way. So really, really appreciative of all those people. And of course, to anyone who's, of course, here tonight, and students just walked in. Amazing to see you, students. I've got students and former teachers here tonight. So thank you so much. Full circle, right? Yeah, appreciate it. So the title, Stay Up. You know, this is, the book was actually going to be called Woke Black Child. And, but then of course the conservatives ruined the word woke, right? I couldn't use it anymore. But you know, it is what it is. And I still like the word woke. I mean, all it is a black way of saying awake. And I like saying things in black ways, and I like being awake. So to me, that word will never die. But stay up certainly has the same connotation. I want folks to stay up on, you know, anti-racism, stay up on the learning and unlearning that are necessary to be engaged thoughtfully with our society and its, you know, oppressive nature. And stay up also happens to be, if you're not a part of the community, just something Black people say to each other, like to say goodbye sometimes, you know, stay up. That and stay tanned sometimes works too. Just depends on the day. But yeah, so I wrote this book. It's got a mix of sort of mini memoirs from my life, just little vignettes and things like that. I know that because it's about racism, some of the people that have been a part of my life in the past are probably nervous about the fact that I wrote this and wondering if they're featured in it in any, you know, interesting ways. And that may be, but I've tried my best to, you know, protect people's identities for the most part. It's been an interesting upbringing, you know, as a Black biracial kid on the prairies, and certainly growing up in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, of all places, which in many ways can be viewed as this sort of privileged bubble that is sort of, just sequestered away from some of the realities of, or was at least when I was growing up, some of the realities of the broader racial dynamics that we see in our province and our country and world. So yeah, you'll get to know a little bit of what I'm talking about as I move through it, but it's also got what I hope is an accessible entry point into anti-racism theory. So anti-racism theory is a real, field of knowledge. It's a field of study. I think a lot of times when people are debating race and politics and things like that and social justice in our communities or, heaven forbid, online, they don't understand that there is a whole field of study dedicated to, understanding oppression in its various forms, and that people have dedicated their lives to this work, much in the same way that scientists have dedicated their lives to science, and that those who have often know what they're talking about. They haven't just come to their opinions and conclusions, based on whims or their own personal experience. So I hope that people will find that valuable, but also certainly accessible. Because I didn't learn any anti-racism theory until I got to university. And to me, that's sort of a travesty, right? And that's why I wrote the book, is because if school divisions and our ministry won't get behind, educating students about anti-racism, I wanted there to be a way, so I wanted to add my voice to the, growing list of voices that are out there with these anti-racism books. So, yeah, can I read a little bit for you? Would that be okay? So I'm going to start with an excerpt from chapter, actually, let me start with the introduction, and then I'll just do like 3 excerpts after that. Intro sounds like a good place to start, right? Have you checked your news feed lately? It's overwhelming out here. It's beatings and murders and shootings and demonstrations and wrongful convictions and wrongful deaths and hell, even wrongful acquittals going on. And all this has been happening damn near cyclically for decades. It's easy to let it all catch up to you, overtake you, immobilize you. That's exactly how I felt when I watched the police killing of Philando Castile, a 32-year-old Black man in Minnesota in 2016. Castile was driving one night in July when police stopped him and killed him in front of his partner, Diamond Reynolds, and her 4-year-old daughter, who were both in the car. No matter the details of the incident, the motive for the killing, or the fact that Castile had been stopped by police a total of 49 times in the 13 years leading up to his death, watching the incident on video from my home in Canada changed a lot for me. First off, it changed me, like who I was at the core. Immediately after seeing it, I fell victim to that same old immobility. I curled up in a fetal position and remained there mentally and emotionally for months. I stopped engaging with anti-racism for a time, withdrew socially, and stopped writing and creating as well. It was the first time that I had experienced a setback of such magnitude. It made it clear to me that anti-Black racism was a trauma that could impact me and all Black people, even from a great distance, and its painful blows stay coming relentlessly. Because of that, I've realized that our work in fighting racism must be relentless too, though not without rest. That's why now, during a time of both ample motivation and sufficient means, amid increasingly rampant racial injustice and division, I've decided to write this book. Thank you for joining me, for showing interest, for wanting to listen and maybe learn a little bit too. I believe that when we make the decision to truly listen to each other, we become like family. So I hope you don't mind me thinking of you as such and calling you that too. Family. It's a term of endearment, respect, maybe gratitude for what we can all accomplish together in the future, or what we can transform in our lives and our society. Those of you who are young readers are aptly poised to take on this work, full of promise, creativity, and possibly angst over the alarming state of the world. Trust me, that angst is a normal human response to what is at times a dreadful reality. The state of the world is alarming. So please, don't try to stifle that angst. It is a necessary feeling, a feeling everybody should have in the face of injustice, and one that we can use as fuel for our ever important fight. So I'm just going to pause there. And as I move into the next excerpt, I want you to know at the beginning of each chapter, I've got this little mini poem thing going on, which was really important to me too. I'm a poet, and I think that poetry sometimes has a way of encapsulating our emotions in a way that is certainly more palatable and narrative too, right? So what I learned as a spoken word artist and as a hip hop artist too, is that sometimes when argumentation doesn't work, story does and poetry does. It just has this way of sort of circumnavigating, that part of the brain that wants to immediately argue and debunk and debate. and sometimes hits people here. So I'll read you one poem to sort of start, and then I'll end with a poem at the very end of the readings here that would be a bit of a teaser for you anyways. So little short poem to start chapter 1. You might have never heard of it, but I call it BSP. It's a built-in sort of radar that finds the enemy. So don't be trying to sell no apps or decoders to me when Black sensory perception smell racism for free. The chocolate dinosaur. Yeah, I know, you weren't expecting that probably, right? Tyrannosaurus Rex, Brontosaurus, Brachiosaurus, Velociraptor, the chocolate dinosaur, Stego. Wait, what? That's right, I said it. The chocolate dinosaur. Doesn't fit with your encyclopedic knowledge of dinosaur species, does it? Yeah, that's how I felt when I first heard about it too. And no, I'm not talking about some kind of delicious novelty treat neither, nah. What I'm talking about is me. I'm the chocolate dinosaur. And the situation in which I became that is probably my earliest memory of experiencing racism. I was in first grade. My classmates and I were outside for recess, out in that cold, snowy abyss that is winter in Saskatchewan. I was pretty new to that school and hardly knew anybody there. But the truth is, I was a bit of a loner kid. I hardly ever knew anybody back then. They called me shy. Everybody did, even my own family. Looking back, I'm not sure how much of that shyness was an inherent personality trait, or if it mostly stemmed from my self-consciousness about being Black, and so often being the only Black kid outside my household. I wouldn't have thought about this connection back then, though, and no one would have really helped me to. That's the way it was. For a lot of young racialized people, that's the way it still is. And that's exactly what I want to undo. Growing up in the 1980s and 1990s in the predominantly white southern Saskatchewan towns of Regina and Moose Jaw, pretty much guaranteed that I wouldn't hear or take part in any critical conversations about race, let alone about racism, ever. Even the often mocked town name Moose Jaw is an anglicization, more like an erasure of a Cree term, Moose Justinici, meaning a warm place by the river, an origin that few people know about. From what I could tell in my youth, the grown folks around me dealt with race and racism using the very same strategy: ignore, 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 unless something bubbled over. See, then, as with now, something often had to pop before the topic of racism even came to the surface, at which time it might be addressed, usually with a Band-Aid solution. For something to pop in the first place, though, someone would have to complain about racism. And in order for someone to complain about racism, they'd have to be able to understand it, recognize it, and feel valued and empowered enough to speak out. Well, for a 6-year-old Black kid in Saskatchewan, good luck with that. Like a lot of young Black kids, I had no deliberate guidance for my Blackness. While my folks taught me well enough not to judge anyone by their skin color or background, I had no real understanding of the concept of race or what it meant in our society. Nor did I have any real terminology for race or racism. Within my household, between my mom, my sister, and me, Blackness was ever present and therefore not questioned. However, it was also seldom spoken of. My parents instilled in us kids their strong values for compassion, justice, and equality through their actions more so than through their words. When I went out into the world, I tried to take those values with me, but I quickly developed an obscure sense of being very different from my overwhelmingly white peers, many of whom made that difference well known. Eventually, I developed my own cold shell of shyness to protect me from the cruel intentions of some of these kids. If I avoided getting close to them, I reasoned, they couldn't hurt me. Facing racial hostility back then, I thought that my racist peers and even my potentially racist peers were the real enemy, rather than a racist society that constantly churns racism and racists out. The system we live in is designed this way, setting whiteness on a pedestal that is both invisible and starkly obvious at once. I didn't consciously see this pedestal nor understand systemic racism as a kid. I simply focused on avoiding racist individuals. And since I could never be sure of who was or wasn't racist, I decided just not to speak to anyone that I didn't really know or trust. Believe that made making friends difficult. Still, there were times when I could temporarily overcome my shyness. Role play games helped, likely because they let me become somebody else, somebody raceless, whether it was a transformer, a ninja turtle, or whatever. Stepping into these roles meant I could at least try and leave my glaring visible difference behind, if only for a few minutes. It's likely no coincidence that my affinity for shedding my skin like that came about just as I started developing a low self-image, which I now know was caused by anti-Black racism. There were a lot of times when I much preferred acting like someone else instead of being me. I took up theater acting in high school and even pursued the craft well into adulthood. I wonder, was this self-escapism or self-preservation? Just a side note, I didn't put it in here, but one of my acting jobs was as one of Al Capone's Italian henchmen for the Tunnels of Moose Jaw. So, real leap of faith there for everybody. Real interesting experiment, right? Yeah, Gus, if any of you know him. Oh, thank you. My mom says I was a good Gus. So. Whatever the implications of my humble acting career, it may have all started on that snowy day in Regina. It was sunny out, I remember that, but everything was still cold. It usually is in Saskatchewan. I watched quietly as a white classmate stomped his boots hard on the ground and declared that it was a great way to keep your feet warm. I decided to copy him and try the technique myself, as did some other kids. It did help, and I still use that slick move to this day. So whoever you were, kid, thank you. You've kept a Caribbean brother's toes toasty for life. Anyway, all that foot stomping led to some white boys in my class pretending to be dinosaurs. Besides the fact that I was a huge dinosaur nerd and likely had every dinosaur book out from the library at that time, both from the kids and the adult section, the game seemed like another welcome way to stay warm out in that frozen schoolyard. Somehow I was brave enough to try and join in the fun. I'm a T-Rex, I declared, as 4 or 5 of us kids roared and stomped about. No, snapped one of the other boys, you're brown like chocolate, so you're a chocolate dinosaur. That means we have to eat you. I guess the other dino boys liked the idea. They converged on me and I quickly succumbed to something like a pig pile. Besides struggling to breathe under the weight of it, I gotta admit, it was pretty warm underneath all them kids. I was serious about the cold weather family. What really bothered me though was that feeling of being singled out for my skin color and being stripped of my decision-making power because of it. And so, for all my joking, it wasn't funny. The seemingly innocent label of the chocolate dinosaur immediately proved right all of my insecurities about being Black, that is, being different in the first place. I'm grown now and educated in anti-racism. I can now articulate that what I was experiencing in first grade was the feeling of being othered. But back then, nah, I just felt bothered. And I had no idea why, although in retrospect, this BS was likely one of my first experiences with BSP. It's like ESP, extrasensory perception, but Black sensory perception. Like when your gut tells you that somebody or something around you is racist, no matter how subtle, nuanced, or unprovable the racism may seem. I should note that the BSP acronym here is meant to be playful and by no means exclusive. All racialized folks, not just Black folks, likely have a similar intuition for racism, as all people who experience any sort of oppression likely have the same. After all, it's hard not to notice a weapon when you're the target of it, no matter how concealed it may be. Black sensory perception may sound like a gift offered in parcel with the curse of oppression, but the problem with BSP, like with any superpower, is that until you've learned how to use it and harness it, it's useless and potentially even dangerous. Indeed, without knowing the many names and faces of racism, all you might be left with after a racist encounter is confusion and the enduring feeling of having been gut punched. Definitely not a gift. And although racialized folks are often able to feel this pain, without anti-racist education, we are often unable to understand or precisely explain the source of it. No doubt pain with an unknown source is the hardest kind of pain to treat and the most dangerous kind to let be. It's a catch-22. I mean, how are we supposed to change the things that hurt us while we're still hurting? At any rate, healing ourselves starts with one thing, trusting that the gut knows what's up. So I'm going to pause there for that reading. The idea of, a lot of what I talk about in that chapter is that we got to trust our intuition sometimes. And there's a few sort of spiritual elements in this book, as you could tell by like the amethyst crystals on the front cover here too, that I think make this book a little bit different than some of the anti-racism books that are out there that might not have, broached this subject. but intuition is something that I've come to really begin to trust and unlock more in my own life. And I think one of the reasons why I hadn't, up until a few years ago, was because of colonialism and white supremacy and the ways in which, through institutions, they seek to diminish ways of knowing that are outside of, what we would conceive of as, scientific or, otherwise colonially approved. So this next piece is, let me just see here. Yeah, so this is has to do with athleticism and stuff like that, and Black confidence. It's from chapter 3, which is called Don't Be Hating Yourself. It's like there's an ellipsis there, because internalized racism, I think, is one of the most potent forms of racism. Of course, it's an after impact or an after effect of both systemic and individualized racism. But what it can lead to in terms of self-loathing and then mental health problems and stuff like that can be very, very dire. So confidence, when you have confidence, and especially Black confidence, which is also something that's been diminished and regulated and discouraged in young people especially, it's a great antidote to that. So it goes, as I said, I had hops back in school, and athletic endeavors like basketball and track became new arenas in which I could find success. And these sports, unlike studying English, afforded me some semblance of Blackness, of feeling Black, which I rarely experienced elsewhere during my school days. The few Black role models I found within the athletic sphere felt like they were truly for me. My goodness, I remember watching TV and seeing the Jamaican-Canadian sprinter Donovan Bailey smash through the world record for the 100-meter dash like it was yesterday. How many remember that? Yes. Dude was at the 1996 Olympics in Atlanta. It was the summer right after 7th grade. My whole family was gathered around. Even watching the pre-race interviews was a marvel, as several young Black athletes like Bailey, Addo Bolden, and others each declared themselves the fastest man on earth, calling BS on all other claimants and channeling their best GOAT energy. The strangest thing was, each of them talked like they believed it too, like they truly believed in themselves and in their greatness. I had never seen such confidence, such pride, such unapologetic boss energy in my life. I needed me some of that. But then to see Donovan Bailey, a Caribbean man like me, running for Canada, the country I called home, after a bad start even, come from behind and absolutely surprise, annihilate them other dudes? Well, my mom screamed, my dad hollered, and I damn near had a heart attack, let me tell you. If I had plans that night, I canceled them. I was vibrating. Donovan Bailey's confidence, success, and Blackness were hypnotizing. I'll never forget his facial expression when he crossed the finish line. Bailey held his mouth and his eyes open at full capacity as he relished in the victory. It was Black joy epitomized. My next few nights were not spent partying, but rather compiling a scrapbook of all the Donovan Bailey news clippings I could find and trying to figure out how to become Donovan Bailey. It was the beginning of my deep love affair with track and the real beginning of my exploration and my claiming of my own Blackness, a life phase Ibram X. Kendi has concisely termed racial puberty. Overnight, your boy was a Black flower blossoming. By then, I already knew I was a fast runner, but the time had come to get serious and start proving it. I knew I could easily beat anybody in my grade in a foot race, and straight up just started challenging people left and right. This became a great way for me to overcome my usual shyness. I'd just be like, yo, what's your name? You want to race? One of them races that did set me back though. And not because I lost, I won. It was what this dude told me afterward. Yeah, but Black people have an extra muscle though, he groaned in front of all our peers. What, I said? Yeah, he said, it's not fair because Black people have an extra muscle in their leg. I was a kid. I don't know why I gave my classmate the credibility of a biologist with a PhD in human anatomy, but I did. I didn't talk back or refute his bogus claims. There wasn't no smartphones back then, hardly an internet, so I couldn't Google it and be like, not true, see? I just had to wonder about it, half believe it, be embarrassed about not knowing it in the first place, and then worst of all, feel bad for cheating. Whether he meant to or not, this sore loser classmate of mine had taken one of the few elements that I attributed to my Black identity, and that I and others perceived as a positive and turned it into a negative. Well, shoot, I went back to being shy for a minute. Myths about Black bodies as inherently powerful aren't all that uncommon or new. They can be traced all the way back to the days of the transatlantic slave trade, during which traders selected and sold African people for their perceived potential to endure strenuous physical work and produce offspring who would do the same. If this sounds a lot like how workhorses are bought and bred, you're not wrong. And modern day narratives about Black people's inherent athletic advantage are no less dehumanizing. In fact, they contribute to white North America's fearful imaginings, its nightmares, and its persistent stereotypes about Black men especially as potentially dangerous animals. These stories, which position Blackness as both superhuman and subhuman at once, work to justify now, as they did during slavery, the enduring exploitation of Black labor and the ongoing dehumanization and killing of Black people. The trouble was, as I grew, I had begun gaining confidence in myself and my Blackness where there had previously been none, and routinely people would dash that confidence right out of me. I did persevere though, and kept at my athletic endeavors, even as people routinely tried to take me down a peg. And white people taking Black people down a peg was nothing new either. From before emancipation and right through the segregation laws of the Jim Crow South in the US and the widespread segregation policies here in Canada, the perceived social and economic inferiority of Black people has always been rigidly reinforced. Having a society whose very laws uphold white superiority bolstered some white people in asserting that superiority for hundreds of years. For instance, it certainly helped white people to look down on a Black person if that Black person was not legally allowed to drink from the same water fountain as them, or eat from the same lunch table, or sit in the same section of a theater. And if you look on your $10 bill, you'll see Viola Desmond, who was, of course, arrested for sitting in the whites-only section of a theater in Nova Scotia. Under these rules, posted via signage at every turn, white people would appear, feel, and be legally justified in demeaning Black folks. The power imbalance was truly tangible. It wasn't written in fine print. It was posted in all caps. Yeah. So how am I doing for time here? Time for one more. Oh, you know what? Yeah. I think what I should do is I'll just read you this little teaser poem too, because again, I mentioned that the book is sort of spiritual. And I'm really, really proud of that because first of all, I didn't know that like my publisher would go for it or not. It's got ghosts in it, okay? And it is spooky season. So I thought, why don't I just share with you one little poem that sort of references this experience I had. And then if you're intrigued or interested at all by it, you'll have to buy a book. So yeah, this part of the book comes from chapter 7, and to me, it's one of the most powerful. You know, I really, in the midst of writing this, was involved in some serious and some deep introspection and some unpacking. And, I talk in the book about how I went through a mental health crisis. So basically just looking back on all of the ways in which my society and its institutions and its agents effectively coerced me away from my own Black identity, as I was compelled to lean more and more into white standards of attire, speech, appearance, whatever it might be. And, as a young kid, again, with no racial literacy or guidance, you just sort of do those things, partly because they're encouraged at every turn. You're encouraged not to talk like that, dress like that, be like that, right? And so you eventually, if you're like me, get afforded this honorary white status by your friends. And it feels good, in the moment, because you're sort of getting that proximity to white privilege. You're not getting singled out or anything like that. But then, when you turn 40 and start writing a book about it all, you realize, oh, damn, I had to erase myself to gain that acceptance. And if that doesn't cause a mental health crisis in a person, I don't know what does. So writing this book was really, truly an instance of awakening for me. And now, I'm on that healing journey. I'm happy to say that, I'm stepping back into Blackness, which is back into myself, and it feels amazing. And that's what liberation is all about. So my willingness or my interest in including spiritual elements within this book also goes along with the fact that, spirituality and Blackness and Black history to me are inseparable as well. And I've learned recently about some incredible seers in my Black family in the Bahamas who are my ancestors, who I believe have passed me some gifts. So this poem references this moment I had sitting in a church, in a cathedral, where I had just finished listening to Nate Leipziger and Eugene Arcan, so a survivor of the Holocaust and a survivor of Indian residential schools, telling their stories and exchanging, respect and solidarity with each other. And I had a moment, when I looked up at the ceiling. They were looking at me sideways, twisted, upside down. I was looking up at them, up to them, all around. It's when I got the nod that I thought I could have died. Dude was hanging from the rafters, but very much alive. Yeah, so thank you very much. Thanks for listening. Could I answer any questions for anyone before we move into assigning? Yes.
I'm curious about conversations you had with your family about everything with this book.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting. I would say they were pretty minimal. I did ask permission. I just said, can I write about you guys, basically? And I'm leaving the rest a surprise. There's a bit in there about my sister, though. And I asked her permission to write about this moment that I remember very, very palpably and, vividly. She was getting her hair straightened. And, my mom, there's a whole thing, right, with straightening hair, where you use this stuff that they call relaxer, which is the opposite of what it does to you. And so it's burning her scalp and she's running around the house. I can't take it, Mom, I can't take it. And then they shove her head in the sink and try and get it off before it eats through her skin. And but this is what people go through to achieve, Euro-Western beauty standards. And it's really, part and parcel of some of the social forces that I talk about in the book. So yeah, my sister was a bit reluctant about that, but then she gave me the nod to go ahead and include that. So I'm glad she did. Yeah, it's something that Malcolm X talked about a lot too, that was another book that I read that was supremely influential in writing this one, is his autobiography. And when I talk about spiritual experiences, I can only say that when I read his book, you know how when you're reading a book, you have your voice in your head that reads it to you? Anyways, his voice read it to me. And it was one of the most powerful, instances of reading a book that I've ever had in my life. Felt very connected. Yes.
Curious what your dream is for this book, coming from the prairies, and like what's your dream?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I was always hoping, and this is the catch-22. I was hoping that it would find its way into schools, and I'm still hoping that, right? Class sets, whatever it might be, for students to study this book. Of course, I'm up against a few barriers in that respect. One is that it actively critiques schools, right? And this is just, of course it does, right? Schools are institutions, effectively agents of, colonialism and stuff like that. Even though I work in one, I fully acknowledge that. And the other is that this is exactly the type of book that will get banned in several locales, whether, it be in the US or potentially here in Saskatchewan. There are critiques of, things like the school resource officer, program and other elements of schools. And just a few real harsh looks at reality that I hope the best of educators among us will be keen to share with students. And I think that they will. It will just be a matter of whether or not the state intervenes, as they have throughout the course of history, dating back to, preventing Black people from learning how to read during the times of the slave trade. So this is, just an ongoing fight, right? We're fighting right now to be able to, bring in sexual health information and resources and teach about gender identity, which by now, ought to be among the most basic of things that we teach in schools. But we're facing active pushback, of course. So my dream is that those kids in those classrooms will get a hold of this. But if not, hopefully they find it in their own way. Yeah, thank you. Did you have a question too? Yeah.
First, I want to say thank you for writing this book.
Oh,
I
thank
am
you.
so grateful that
Mm.
someone here has written this book.
Oh.
And I can't wait to read it. I want to ask though, Khodi, what your response would be to a critique of color coding as a way of doing anti-racist work.
Mhm.
Because we know scientifically that there's no justification for the idea of
Mhm.
race. And from the time that race entered European discourse, it was a way, I mean, immediately there began to be these clusters of things around white, black,
Mhm.
yellow, red. So my question is there a problem with going on talking about black, white,
Mhm.
red, yellow? I mean, we don't talk about red and yellow much
Mhm.
anymore. There's certainly anti-Asian racism and anti-Indigenous racism,
Mhm.
but those things seem to have fallen away
Mhm.
as a way of depreciating
Mhm.
people. So I just wonder
Yeah.
what you think about
Well,
all
it's a
that.
really good comment. I mean, I think in terms of the words that we use to refer to certain groups and things like that, I think one thing just to keep in mind is that, each racial group is different, and each community will have their own response to racism, and of course, also their own terminology. And terminology, it was one of the biggest considerations, certainly when I was writing this book, is, okay, what words do I use right now? Because some of them are brand new, some of them have been around for a long time, some of them are falling out of use and everything like that. And so I do acknowledge, I think in the introduction, just that, language changes. And if you're reading this 20 years from now, forgive me, because I'm doing my best to use the language that is widely acceptable now. But even then, you're not going to please everyone. And so from a standpoint of using literal colors to refer to different groups, I do think you'll find that it is very dependent on those groups and even the individual members within them as to whether or not they will respect that approach. And even within the Black community, right? Some people don't like the word Black. But again, in terms of what is widely socially acceptable, and of course within the community too, Black has become a really useful and I think acceptable term. It, to me, sort of, reaches a little bit deeper than, what some people have referred to as an African-American identity or African Canadian. For me, I'm Caribbean Canadian, but, if you go back far enough, it is African too. And all of this, it's really such a, there's such a diversity of richness within the Black community. Certainly it's not a monolith, but for the sake of an umbrella term that we can use to speak to and identify a common, way of relating to each other and a common resistance, I think it's really useful. The reason that I think it's important to go on talking about race is, even though it's socially constructed and not technically real, which you're very keen to point out, is that racism is ever present, right? And so even though we know that there's no biological basis for race and that, identities are constantly being socially negotiated and mediated and changed, racism is just not going away. And so we need to have a language and a strategy for overcoming that. So that's why the ongoing use of the terms and the ongoing discourse around race, color, identity, I think is important. I think it was James Baldwin said, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. So, I think if we were to stop talking about this, we would be allowing the racism to fester, grow, spread, and continue to do its dirty work. So that's why we continue to talk about race, not to exacerbate the problem, but to overcome it. Yeah, thanks. Yes, in the back.
What advice would you have? I'm hoping to major in anti-racist education for my master.
Awesome.
And I'm wondering what advice you would have for people going into that program.
Find yourself. Yeah. This work, like whoever you are, is so dependent on you finding the source of the passion, you know, within yourself. And we all have a racial identity, and we all have a relationship to racism. For some of us, it's very complicated. You know, for me too, as a biracial Black person, my race changes sometimes depending on where I go and which community I'm in. I could be the Black kid from Moose Jaw or white boy in the Bahamas. You know what I'm saying? And that's just the way that it is. But we all have a social positioning, a way of relating to, and not just racial oppression, but other forms of oppression, which are constantly intersecting with that, right? Sexism, homophobia, transphobia, classism, ableism. So we all have ways that we either benefit from or are disadvantaged by these social forces. If you can find your place in all of that, you might be able to find the true motivation for moving forward and doing the work. To me, when I did my master's, that was the real precursor to this, writing that thesis, interviewing poets, you know, about their experiences and really investigating my own, was I started to understand how I fit into it all, right? Which gave me a reason, you know, a real reason to do it. So I think just be vulnerable and know too that, like, you know, when you move into that space, you're going to want to look for a supervisor. I was very blessed to have Dr. Verna St. Dennis as my supervisor and some other incredible, you know, profs helping me out and working on that. She gave me the space to lean into like ways of knowing and ways of researching that weren't colonial, you know, so using narrative and using more qualitative forms of research and including myself as a participant in my own study, right? They have fancy words for this stuff now, but I just love it because, you know, we grew up, a lot of us, with this idea that, you know, to go to school and do research and stuff meant you'd be tabulating all day, or I don't know, using test tubes or something. But you can just talk to people. You can hear their stories and be a witness, you know, and create that that witness testimony for others, which, you know, I hope is part of what I've done with this book too. But super excited for you to take that journey, and I can't encourage you enough. Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks everybody. I'll turn it back to Alyssa there.
All right, I'll just say a quick word before I let you go. I'd like to thank Khodi again for being with us tonight. That was wonderful. We have copies of Stay Up on the desk to your right. And if you'd like your copy signed, or if you'd like to say hello, Khodi will be happy to meet you at the signing table here. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you, everybody.